submission process to have a research and context section. As noted, the discussion sections don't always follow what we think they should follow, so we're going to actually impose this on authors to really ask the question, why their research is important, and to really sort of put the implications for the future. The research and context section, the example is from Lancet 2010. It's a small little box. It's not really anything that looks much different than the abstract, and it will probably appear in the back near the discussion section, but it only have two components to it. Just a couple sentences describing the systematic review, where the authors are going to have to show a sort of description of how they searched for all of the evidence and explain how that evidence was assessed. And then an interpretation, taking their research from this paper that they're submitting and putting it into the broader totality of work out there to help orient where it is filling in an important gap. And it has been very well received at Lancet and Lancet Neurology, and I think this is going to be well received in our journal as well.
I think it's important. It seems a little burdensome. I mean, when I first saw the systematic review part, if you've ever done a systematic review, these can be very long studies and very detailed studies, and I don't know when you would find the time to do your research if you also had to do a systematic review. But at the same time, if you plow ahead with your research and you haven't adequately studied the literature, you might be making a lot of duplication of work that's out there. And what we would like to do is move the science forward. So we need the authors to take into account what's been done before so that they can take the next step forward rather than repeating what we call Me Too papers, when some research has been done on a topic and then another author will try and publish the same thing. Just Me Too, I found the same results. And to some degree, replication is good and important, and we need that, but sometimes there's enough replication already that we don't need another Me Too. So even though this seems like a difficult piece to add, maybe some more work, it forces the authors to move forward. If that makes any sense.
Tables really need to be designed to be understandable. I think Kate mentioned that earlier. If a paper uses a series of tables, it's really, really important that the same format is used. Again, the issue here is really just to help interpretability of the paper, and authors are encouraged to again follow the instructions of particular journals. I think by and large these instructions are pretty much similar across journals. For figures such as graphs, diagrams, you really should only use them if it's going to convey some information. I think sometimes we get figures that are very, very complicated and there's almost too much detail. It can be overwhelming, and so to think about as you're putting together figures, to do it in such a way that it's going to mostly be published probably in black and white, so it should be clear enough that different streams of data, different data series can be differentiated. But basically, it's a very nice tool, I think, for obviously summarizing data, and I think it's a fast way to sort of capture.
I think what you're getting at is from our own training, where they emphasize that sometimes simpler is better, and the point you're trying to convey requires 20 tables and figures, and then maybe that's too much. And sometimes simpler is better.
And then finally, obviously the reference section, we talked a little bit about that. And I think as Kate noted, I think it's it's very important for authors to provide a sufficient number of references for their work.
Yeah, the references also can come up to the current, they can be current, and they can be older, to have a, sometimes you run across a paper that's been submitted where all the references are taken from, some 5-year time period, and you wonder if that's just the only data they had access to, the only research they had access to, and so they clearly haven't reviewed the current literature or older literature because they're not citing it. And so it makes you wonder how the...
And so, yeah, the references, I guess that was like maybe the one point I missed was in terms of the reference formatting. Almost all journals follow one formatting requirement or another. To be perfectly honest with you, I think if you're consistent in your application of references, usually the journal will, once a paper is accepted, actually typeset it for their specific format. So, some sources for further guidance. Again, I mentioned Barbara Gastel and her work. Some other papers here, Fundamentals of Writing Biomedical Research Papers, Amy Seeger, and Preparing Scientific Illustrations, A Guide to Better Posters, Presentations, and Publications by Mary Helen Briscoe. There are more? Yes. The responsibilities of authorship. This is something that young authors should know a lot about. Authors must be willing to take responsibility for their entire manuscript. Basically, you will be asked questions by different individuals. For the Alzheimer's and Dementia, the Alzheimer's Association actually actively promotes some articles depending on their relevance, and the public relations team of the Alzheimer's Association will maybe contact you, or perhaps your own institution may have a media department that may wish to highlight your work. So you should be aware that this will be introduced into the public, and although it's primarily for academic and research audiences, the stuff does make it into the popular press. Multi-authored manuscripts should have a declaration of each author's contributions in the submission letter. Again, this is just to attest to everybody participating in the intellectual development of a paper. The copyright of publications, this is done for the protection of authors and the publishers. If accepted, a transfer of copyright agreement will be sent to the corresponding author. Authors have to sign this and return it back to, in this case, Elsevier, but usually it resides with whoever the publisher of a journal is. Two, I guess, important notes here is the fact that the actual manuscript itself, what you've written, does belong to you. This is your work. So Elsevier formats a paper, there's great expense to get this published, but the actual work, the manuscript that you write in Microsoft Word, that is yours, and you certainly are free to share that with your colleagues as you see fit.
So just to clarify that, in the U.S. now any work that was funded by the NIH needs to be submitted to something called the PubMed Central, and that work, because the NIH paid for it, will be available for free 1 year after it's published in a journal. And there's a difference between what you can submit there and what the journal actually owns. The journal did all the copyright, the copy editing and major article look pretty, they own that. You own your article, you own the Word version that doesn't look so nice. So you can't give away the copy that belongs to the journal. And what ends up getting submitted to the NIH, the PubMed Central system, is usually the less pretty version.
The unformatted version. We talked a little bit before about conflict of disclosures. This is very much becoming sort of a fact of life. Really need to disclose relationships that may have the appearance of a conflict of interest. I mentioned this earlier. Editors, we do reserve the right to reject an article on the basis of a significant conflict of interest. Sometimes we have had submitted to our journal papers that come from a manufacturer of a particular type of diagnostic instrument, and clearly what they're trying to do is
Self-promote.
self-promote. It's how wonderful that their instrument is, that it can detect with 100% sensitivity individuals with Alzheimer's disease.
And all their citations are to themselves.
Oh, and apparently the companies have found out about this.
Well, we can keep talking if you can hear us. Yes.
About the ownership, now we think that you